first step when processing the acorns is to shell them. And here I'm just using a rock to crack them open and a knife to skin the acorns a little bit. Just get all the excess skin off. And once that's done, we focus on just trying to get all the tannins out of the acorns. And for this method, I'm doing a cold and a hot method hybrid. So I soak them overnight, put the water in them, put them in the fridge so that they don't rot, and that allows them to, the tannins will slowly leach out of the acorns, and then you change the water every day, and the water turns this nice pretty orange color, and I use that as for medicinally and stuff, but just kind of keep that process going and keep on doing that. And also soaking them helps get some of the skins off as well, and that was very helpful. And here I'm starting to boil the acorns, and I'm just getting the water going, and the boiling is a little bit harsher on the acorn, so sometimes it can take out too much if you boil for too long. So I was trying to be careful. So I only did about a couple of changes of water. I did not want to. I've done this before with the hot method where I boiled them for too long, and then some of the fats were gone, and it wasn't as nutritious. And that's why the cold leaching is kind of better in some ways, in my opinion, because it will allow the acorns to leach the tannins slower, and you get a more flavorful, nutrient dense kind of end product. And again, I can save the water. Sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't. It would just depend on what was. The water doesn't last super long, and here I'm just put them on a rack, and I just dry them in the oven. Of course, primitively I would do this on a basket or something, but there I just dry them in the oven, and afterwards I ground them, and then actually ended up using them in the program that I taught. And these are the dried acorns right here. And I ended up using them in the program I taught, and which I'll talk about later. I made acorn pancakes out of this batch. Now we're on to the cold processing, which is, this method was the one I spoke about earlier, but this one was only cold processing. So it was I didn't boil these acorns. I just had them soak for quite a long time. I think I probably soaked these ones, changing the water every day, for about 2 or 3 weeks. And there again, it was just a process of doing a little bit every day. So I ran a program for youth going over the basics of survival, and I ended up having to do a lot of prep for it because I was kind of going over a lot. We went over edible plants, we did some carving. This is one of the edible plants that I showed the program participants. It's a sugar bush, and the berries are edible, and and have a nice sweet, slightly tannic but mostly sweet flavor to them. And it was a good thing. I also ended up showing some plants that were poisonous, such as poison hemlock. And these berries I've been looking at for a while, so it was nice to finally try them out and let the kids talk with them. We also went over some thistle and some poison hemlock. This right here is the poison hemlock. And I also, in the prepping, ended up harvesting and caretaking some areas and harvesting some sticks for carving. So I didn't go over knife carving this program, but they did use stone tools, which was really cool, and ended up harvesting these ones, and needed about 20 blanks of them. So it was quite a lot, but it ended up working out quite well. And I ended up, it is nice doing these programs. I end up not having to, but it's proved a good opportunity to caretake the land, and this area was quite overgrown with this kind of willow stuff, and so it was nice to kind of saw some of it down and let it grow. So in the program, I went over shelter, went over fire making, I went over, we went hiking, we did some awareness games, we did plant identification, we built a water filter, we did storytelling, and ended up doing some fire by friction demonstrations as well. The fire making was really fun because we did 5-minute fires and stuff. And yeah, the group was a good group, and when I got to go out in nature, and unfortunately it was a heat wave, so that was challenging, and the weather was not on our side, but it was a really good program. And here I'm doing the fire by friction demo. Some of the kids got really excited once the fire sparked up, and it was a very good program.
It's almost like playing violin, but you have a beginner.
Back up.
Gotta get some shade. Dude, it's lightning.
I like the smell too. Daddy, you might want to move that way. Oliver.
making is a really time consuming but very fulfilling skill. I have personally learned a lot from bow making, and this bow in particular is one that I started on about almost 10 years ago, and it's made out of hickory, and it's one of those projects that kind of just, put down, have to move, life happens, so but I finally was just committed to finishing this project, and I ended up in this stage of the process is called the final tiller, and there are definitely some issues with the bow that I was very concerned about and still kind of am, but one of the issues was just there was some light checking, which is when the wood starts to split a little bit, and that can become an issue for the bow breaking. And this final tillering process, the tillering process is essentially when you are trying to make both limbs bend evenly and make sure that there's no hinges where the bow will break or weaknesses in the limb, and then just bringing it down to a nice draw weight that I would want to have. And for this project too, when I was stringing the bow and everything, I was constantly having to warm up the bow, so I would take it and kind of like pull on the string partially so that we get a better read on it. And this bow in particular has I had to spend a lot of the time was spent just assessing where the bow was at, and that's a lot of the final tilling process is just assessing where the bow is at and trying to figure out what needs to happen, if the limbs are even or anything like that. And for this one too, there was a tool I was using earlier called a cabinet scraper, and here I'm just trying to get a nice feel for where the bow's at. And the other thing too that I'm trying to do is not pull the bow too much and not spend too much time not pull it back too far, because if we pull back too far, the bow will break and might cause permanent damage to it. And I would use a pencil to mark it as well, and that was always helpful for the tillering process. And this tool I'm using here is called the cabinet scraper, and that one is meant for obviously making cabinets, but also for just scraping down a very, very thin amount of wood at a time. And while it's a very effective tool, I was not able to get it sharp enough. You have to constantly kind of resharpen it and everything. So I referenced back to my materials, and I just ended up using a very sharp knife, which I should see here very soon. But the tillering process is essentially a lot of just, I would take off about maybe 50 scrapes at a time, maybe less, and then pull back the bow and kind of see where the limbs are at. And with this bow, the upper limb, which is the one that's standing up, the one that's upright, that one was more stiff. So when I pulled back, it would come back. I would see it as being more stiff. So that one I took off a lot more wood. And here I'm using the cabinet scraper. I just was not getting enough wood off for that to make it worth my time. And there again, it's just a constant process of trying to assess where the weaknesses are, where wood needs to come off, and it's one of the reasons why I really love bow making. I tried using some other tools as well. I tried using a hatchet, and that didn't work out so well. Just as almost like just an experiment to see like, oh, maybe it might work, but this is where I started to transition to the knife. And so some of these the issues with this bow that might still potentially come up for me is that there are, like I mentioned earlier, the checking and the other elements, and that's kind of what prevented me from finishing this project. Also, just overall fear of failure, but that's why I just wanted to push through and just give myself permission to break this bow if that was going to happen, because that is part of making bows. I've made other bows other than this one. This one was just a more long-term bow project I had done, and I just wanted to, but there's always a inherent fear of putting in hundreds of hours of work and then not having the project break, but that's just part of life and making things. So, but yeah, here and there again, it was just going back and forth, pulling the bow. Eventually, the upper limb I started getting even bent, and it started to feel really good. The limbs felt very fluid. They looked more fluid as I started pulling back more. So I started drawing back a little bit farther, not too much farther. And I was a little worried there was a hinge at one point, but I just kept going and just looked at the overall bend. Sometimes what I've noticed is that sometimes there'll be, when I've looked at other people's bows, sometimes the bows will have a little dip. It's like, oh, that one should be a hinge. But when you bend it, it doesn't actually show as a hinge. So that's what I was going off of, and I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but that's what I'm going for. So yeah, and then I just kept pulling back, kept doing it. And as throughout the process too, I would always try to take off some, once I got to bend even, once that other limb became even, and it was an even bend, then I just started taking off evenly on both sides. So it was I would do about 50 scrapes on one limb, 50 on the other. And the tillering stick would have been nice to have for this. I used to have one, and I think it got lost in my storage unit or something, but I essentially ended up just using a mirror to kind of help me. And I just kept slowly inching my way towards doing it. And there again, this project felt really good to finally just complete this project and just see it all the way through. And I was able to finally, get a little more confidence in bow making too, especially with some of these long-term bows. I've done more so kind of quickie bows and stuff, and so doing one of these long-term ones felt really good. And it was just, it just is a really fun process. So I started out with, these are arrow shafts that I harvested and then cured. I had these for a while and measured them out, and the arrow making process was really fun. I had not made a lot of arrows before, so this was kind of a newer project for me. I had made some, but not as in detail, so just made kind of quickie arrows and everything. But there are a couple methods. So the shaft was not completely, the arrow shaft was not completely straight, so I had to kind of use a stove to fire to kind of straighten it out, and the also made some notches to have an arrowhead and did a little carving. And the arrowhead I also felt napped as well, and then lashed on with some artificial sinew. And probably the most time-consuming part of this project was processing the pitch for me, because I had done pitch with other groups of people before, but I had not done it on my own, and so this was a new project for me, and I've been, for whatever reason, slightly intimidated by this process. But essentially it's the pine resin, or resin from trees, but pine resin works the best, and then you cook it down, and then I added some tempering material, which was this was roasted eggshells, and that helps it. Or you can use charcoal, or some people use scat as well. I just used the roasted eggshells and had those on hand, and just kind of have to melt it down and stir it up. And when I did this project, I didn't actually do it necessarily the right way the first time. I ended up not cooking the pitch enough, and so what ended up happening was I ended up having too much. It was not the right color, and I even tried using that to put on the arrowhead, and I tried to make the pitch stick, and it just wasn't looking right, wasn't feeling right. So I ended up kind of redoing it and going back to the drawing board, and essentially just reheated it. And when I tried to pitch it the first time as well, you have to use heat. It just wasn't heating right, and it's also because I'd seen other people's projects that the pitch needs to be a very dark black color, and that's to cook out a lot of the sugars and resins and other trying to get that out of there. And I eventually found that what the vessel I was using was not really great, because it was like an old pot lid and had a hole in it, and the pitch kept leaking out. So I transferred over to this can, and I just ended up cooking it way longer, holding on the fire way longer, and it smoked like crazy, but then it ended up working out really well. And primitively, if I had access to hot-bedded coals or whatever, I would use a shell or even a small rock to kind of heat that up. But doing this in the city, I just ended up using the tuna can, and ended up finally got the color I wanted, and it ended up working out a lot better and feeling right. And I did have to, with pitch, and the pine pitch chew is actually more of a epoxy than it is a glue. It's not quite a glue. It's more so to waterproof things versus glue them on. But in this regard, it helps the arrowhead really stay in there. You can also use this for they call it hafting, but you can haft on knives and other things like that too. And so once I had the arrowhead hafted, I started the arrow fletching, and this was a fun project too. I finally got to use some of the feathers I had found during wanders, and just basically cut up the feathers, lash them onto the arrow, and then and also use some water. The recommended method was to use some glue, but I ended up not using glue, just because I did not have time to let it dry, and those things I just kind of wanted to get a feel for this stage of the process and then continue onward. And ended up using again the artificial sinew to lash it all on there, and finally the arrow was complete, and it was really awesome. And then actually shooting the bow was really fun with the arrow and everything. I just ended up using an archery target that my brother had, and I was was honestly very afraid that it was going to break. I was almost 100% sure it was going to break with the first pullback, but it did end up shooting a couple arrows. The cracks did get a little bigger, but I do intend on using sinew packet or do some kind of repair work on that. But overall, the project felt really good to finally finish, and it felt great to shoot a bow that from start to finish like that. So it was a very, very fun project to do. Stalking and movement is a huge part of what I worked on a lot, and it's a very huge part of hunting and getting to know your surroundings. And a lot of it is what I was doing was just basically doing wanders and trying to find deer sign and areas where animals were, both rabbit tracks and here found some deer tracks and some scat, and really just get to know the area on both a micro and macro level. So and also assessing various areas that I could try and hide and wait for animals or just observe. And this area in particular has a lot of animal activity, a lot of coyote, a lot of rabbit, a lot of deer. There is also a lot of bird activity, a lot of ravens and everything. And I also use this area, I tend to come to this area to do sit spots and also practice the stalking movement. This area is great because there's no poison oak around, so it allows me the mobility and just kind of going from what I'll do is I'll stalk a little bit, move with the brush, pause, and then look up, scan my surroundings, get a feel for it, listen to the bird language, and then keep moving gradually throughout the landscape in a nice slow pace and cadence. This one in particular, this area I've not been too much before, so I was kind of taking my time a little slower and just really trying to get a feel for collect as much information as I possibly could to eventually find areas that I could potentially photograph and or potentially hunt animals. And here I'm just more so, eventually also just sometimes I'll go out and work on just the movement itself and focus on my body, focus on moving with the brush, sticking to cover, staying to the shadows. All these elements are huge for stalking and movement. And sometimes I like to move slowly through the landscape, and sometimes if it's a more open area, I'll try to move a little faster to get to cover. And also another thing I'm working on is sticking to the cover, and because of the height of the brush, it's in this kind of chaparral environment, it's a little bit easier to, it's very easy to not stay to that brush line because it's kind of lower brush and then really big gross oak trees and such. And there are areas of thicket. There's the yerba santa. There's all these great plants to stalk around and stalk with, but a lot of it is just moving in that slow cadence and rhythm. And a lot of what I did too was it's a lot of stop and go. And I've just also learned this from experience, but also just from watching animals, and even watching my cat, when you see animals stalk, they will, and even deer, they'll move a little bit and then they'll stop and pause and listen and then keep going and then stop, pause, listen. And this kind of rhythm was what I was doing. Also, right now the weather's starting to heat up a little bit, it's starting to get a little warmer, so I ended up having just a break just to catch my breath a little bit. Because of some knee injuries, it's a little harder for me to fully get into the really deep squats and move like that. I'm working on that. It does help a little bit. The stocking does help build up strength, and I do work out those areas in my legs. But overall, I wanted to focus on that. Also, staying to the shadow is crucial. That's something that I've been working on as well. Just really trying to hug the brush line and stay there, and then also maintain that distance and just keep aware of my surroundings. And most times I would cross paths with a squirrel, but really what I'm mostly looking for is what the birds are doing around me. So if the birds are alarming at me, or they sense my presence a lot, or making too much noise, I start disturbing them, then I know that I need to calm down a little bit, relax internally, and try and move on, or even pause for about 15 or 20 minutes and just sit and let the area settle a little bit, and myself settle. But overall, between doing this work and doing the bow making and all the other projects, I feel like it took great steps in gaining towards that step of eventually hunting, and practice that skill more. And between the tool making and the body awareness, and also even sharing the skills and teaching the program, that really helped, because I got to scout new areas and everything. But overall, I wanted to try to do more, but I feel like what I did was to the best of my ability, and just taking the time out just to give myself the daily time just to move a little bit and to work on a project and use my hands just really benefited my overall life and overall day throughout the year. Also incorporating some of the tracking I did with this work, and like right here I'm like moving to the brush, just more body awareness, and the benefits of this have been super amazing. And also something I wanted to mention as well is just really had to learn how to keep a balance with practicing these skills as well as maintaining the other necessities of life, such as work and other schoolwork and stuff. And I had to became off balance for a little bit. I had to kind of switch back to just focusing more on skills, and learn some lessons about advocating for myself and doing that. So that was a very excellent lesson for me in self-development, and I've been feeling the benefits of that advocacy. But I am super thankful for the opportunity to be able to practice these skills and learn everything I did this semester. And also I feel very just doing these movement exercises is just really connecting me to the landscape and myself more, and I feel like I've become much more aware of my surroundings and myself, and just learned some very deep, amazing lessons. So thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to continue this work on next semester, and also just feel very grateful for the landscape and everything I just life in general, and that I use throughout this project. So thank you for watching.